Fire has always been one of the most primal fears known to mankind since the dawn of time. It consumes and destroys everything in its path, leaving nothing but ash and sorrow in its wake. We build our homes with materials designed to resist flames, and we install alarms to warn us of impending danger from heat and smoke. But what happens when the fire does not come from the forest or a faulty wire in the wall, but from within the body itself? This is the terrifying reality of spontaneous human combustion, a phenomenon that defies logic and science. It is a horror story where the victim becomes the fuel source and the ignition remains a mystery. Imagine sitting comfortably in your favorite armchair, enjoying a quiet evening alone in the safety of your living room. You feel a sudden and intense heat rising not from the fireplace, but from deep inside your own chest. There is no external flame to douse, and no escape from a fire that burns hotter than a crematorium furnace. Within minutes, the body is reduced to a pile of gray ash, while the newspaper in your hand remains untouched by the flames. This specific scenario has haunted investigators and medical examiners for centuries, creating a legacy of fear. The victims are often found in sealed rooms with no sign of struggle or entry. The concept of a human body bursting into flames without an external ignition source seems like pure fiction or folklore. However, history is filled with police reports and coroner inquiries that detail these exact circumstances with chilling precision. The remains found at these scenes are unlike anything seen in standard house fires or accidents. Usually, the torso is completely incinerated, while the extremities, such as hands or feet, remain perfectly intact. The fire seems to target the core of the victim with a surgical precision that leaves the surrounding furniture scorch-free. It creates a scene of impossible contrasts, where total destruction meets pristine preservation. One of the earliest and most debated cases dates back to the 18th century, involving a woman named Nicole Millet. Her husband was initially accused of murder. When her remains were found reduced to ash in their home in France, the court eventually acquitted him after a surgeon testified that the woman had been consumed by a fire of divine or internal origin. This verdict officially introduced the idea of spontaneous combustion into the legal and medical lexicons of Europe. It sparked a wave of fear that alcohol consumption could turn the human body into a living candle waiting to be lit. The idea of the sinner burning from within took hold. In the United States, the phenomenon gained infamous traction in the mid-20th century with the case of Mary Reeser. It was a humid night in St. Petersburg, Florida, on July 2nd in the year 1951. Mary was a 67-year-old widow who lived a quiet life in a comfortable apartment. She was last seen by her landlady sitting in her armchair, wearing a flammable nightgown and and smoking a cigarette. The evening seemed perfectly normal, with the hum of the city drifting through the windows. No one heard a scream or saw a flash of light emanating from the windows of her apartment that night. When the landlady tried to deliver a telegram the next morning, she found the doorknob was too hot to touch. She called for help, and when the door was finally opened, a blast of heat escaped the room. The sight that awaited the police officers was something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the corner where the armchair had stood there was a pile of black ash and a few coiled springs. Mary Reeser had been almost completely obliterated by a fire of immense intensity. All that remained of her was a shrunken skull, and one foot still wearing a black satin slipper. The heat required to reduce a human body to ash and shrink a skull is estimated to be over 2,500 degrees. A fire of that magnitude should have incinerated the entire apartment building, or at least the room itself. Yet the rest of the apartment was largely undamaged aside from a layer of greasy soot covering the ceiling. Candles on a nearby table had melted, but the wicks remained unburned and standing upright. Papers and furniture just a few feet away from the ash pile were completely untouched by the flames. The fire had been incredibly localized, focusing all its rage solely on Mary Reeser. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was called in to analyze the remains and the scene for any evidence of foul play. They struggled to explain how a fire could burn so hot and yet remain so contained within a small area. Theories ranged from a dropped cigarette igniting her clothing to a lightning strike that bypassed the building structure. The report ultimately suggested the wick effect, where body fat fuels the fire like a candle. However, this explanation failed to satisfy the locals, who believed something far more sinister was at work. The shrunken skull, in particular, defied all standard scientific explanations for how bone reacts to heat. The case of Mary Reeser became known as the Cinder Lady, and it cemented the fear of spontaneous combustion in American culture. It suggested that a person could be sitting in their own home and simply cease to exist in moments. There was no defense against it, and no way to predict who would be taken next by the fire. The silence of the event was perhaps the most disturbing aspect for the neighbors and witnesses. Mary did not run for water or call out for help, suggesting the end came with impossible speed. She simply sat there and burned until there was nothing left but dust and a single foot. Years later, in 1966, another horrific discovery was made in the home of Dr. John Bentley in Pennsylvania. A meter reader let himself into the house of the 92-year-old physician to check the basement utilities. He noticed a strange blue smoke and a peculiar sweet odor that he could not identify. Following the scent, he climbed the stairs to the bathroom, where he found a scene of nightmares. A hole had been burned through the floorboards, exposing the beams and pipes below. Beside the hole lay the only remains of Dr. Bentley, which was his lower leg still clad in a slipper. Dr. Bentley had been a feeble man who used a walker to move around his large and lonely house. The walker was found tipped over the hole in the floor, suggesting a final moment of confusion or collapse. Unlike Mary Reeser, the doctor was not smoking, and there were no open flames in the bathroom. The fire had started on his body and burned downward through the floor with intense directional heat. The rubber tips of his walker were still intact, proving the fire did not spread outward. It was a vertical column of destruction that took the man and left the house standing. The coroner was baffled by the lack of damage to the rest of the bathroom, which was small and enclosed. Paint on the walls next to the hole was not blistered, and the towels hanging nearby were not singed. It was as if the fire had a consciousness and a specific target that it refused to deviate from. The leg that remained was untouched by the fire, ending abruptly at the knee, as if cut by an invisible line. This selective burning is a hallmark of spontaneous human combustion cases that science struggles to replicate. It defies the chaotic and spreading nature of normal structural fires. Skeptics argued that Dr. Bentley must have dropped a match on his robe and fallen unconscious before he could react. They claimed the draft from the basement fed the fire like a chimney, causing the intense, localized heat. But no matches were found, and the doctor had a reputation for being careful with fire safety. The sheer speed required to consume a body to ash before spreading to the wooden walls is baffling. To burn a body to that degree usually takes hours of sustained high temperature in a cremation chamber. Here it seemingly happened in the time it took to walk to the bathroom. Another chilling case occurred in 1986, involving a retired firefighter named George Mott in New York. George was a man who knew the behavior of fire better than anyone, having spent his life fighting it. He was known to be a heavy drinker and had severe lung problems requiring an oxygen tank. He was found in his bed, reduced to a pile of ash, along with the mattress he slept on. A rib cage and a small piece of his skull were the only identifiable pieces of bone remaining. The rest of the room, including the television set at the foot of the bed, was undamaged. The oxygen tank was standing in the corner of the room, and it had not exploded or vented. If an external fire had started, the oxygen-rich environment should have caused a massive inferno. Instead, the fire stayed strictly on the bed, consuming George and the bedding while leaving the curtains alone. The investigator noted that the heat must have been intense enough to vaporize bone, but it did not melt the plastic TV knobs. It was a paradox that frustrated the fire department and left the family with no answers. A man who mastered fire was ultimately consumed by it in the most mysterious way possible. The psychological toll on the families of these victims is immense, as they are denied a proper body to bury. They are left with a pile of ash and a certificate that lists death by accidental fire. But in their hearts, they know that what happened to their loved ones was not a normal accident. The isolation of the victims is a common thread that runs through almost all recorded cases. They are usually alone in their homes, with no witnesses to the start of the blaze. It is as if the phenomenon waits for the moment of solitude before striking. In Ireland, the case of Michael Faherty in the year 2010 brought the phenomenon back into the spotlight. The 76-year-old man was found dead in his living room in County Galway. His body was totally burnt, but the fire had not spread to the furniture or the wooden floor. The coroner, Dr. Kieran McLaughlin, officially ruled the death as spontaneous human combustion. This was the first time in modern history that a legal verdict validated the supernatural occurrence. It was an admission that forensic science had reached its limit and could not explain the evidence. The coroner stated that he had investigated fire deaths for 25 years and had never seen anything like it. There was no accelerant found on the body and no source of ignition near the chair. The fire seemingly originated from within Mr. Faherty, consuming him rapidly and completely. The verdict sent shockwaves through the scientific community, which had long dismissed the phenomenon as myth. It validated the fears of those who believed that the human body contains the seeds of its own destruction. The official document stands as a testament to the unexplainable nature of our existence. Theories about the cause of these fires range from the scientific to the metaphysical and paranormal. Some scientists propose that a build-up of acetone in the body caused by ketosis can make a person flammable. A simple static spark could theoretically ignite the acetone vapor, causing a rapid internal fire. Others suggest that ball lightning or geomagnetic anomalies interact with the electrical field of the body, but none of these theories explain why the furniture is spared or why the extremities remain intact. They are attempts to apply logic to an event that seems inherently illogical. Historical accounts often linked the phenomenon to divine punishment for the sins of gluttony and drunkenness. In the Victorian era, it was used as a cautionary tale to scare people away from spirits. Charles Dickens even used it as a plot device in his novel Bleak House to kill off a character. But the victims are not always drinkers, and many are frail, elderly citizens living quiet lives. The moral judgment has faded, but the mystery and the horror remain as potent as ever. It is a death that seems random and cruel, choosing its victims without a clear pattern. The wick effect remains the most popular scientific explanation, despite its failure to account for all variables. It suggests the victim dies of natural causes, like a heart attack, and a cigarette ignites their clothing. The melting fat then soaks into the clothes, creating a slow, burning candle effect that destroys the body. Experiments using pig carcasses wrapped in cloth have managed to replicate some of the damage. However, these experiments take many hours and require a constant supply of oxygen and fuel. They do not explain the rapid destruction or the shrunken skulls found in cases like Mary Reeser. There is a disturbing silence associated with these deaths that adds to the ghostly atmosphere. Neighbors never report hearing screams of pain or the frantic sounds of a person fighting flames. This suggests that the victims are either dead before the fire starts or are rendered instantly unconscious, or perhaps the fire consumes the vocal cords and lungs so quickly that screaming is impossible. The thought of being awake but unable to scream while burning from the inside is truly nightmarish. It implies a suffering that is beyond human comprehension and completely silent to the outside world. Investigators often note a peculiar greasy soot that coats the upper surfaces of the rooms where these deaths occur. This substance is the residue of the human body that has been vaporized and settled on the walls. It is a gruesome reminder of the person who once lived and breathed in that space. Cleaning this soot is a horrific task that often falls to family members or specialized crews. It carries a sickly sweet smell that is described as distinct from wood smoke or burning plastic. It is the scent of organic matter returning to carbon in the most violent way. The preservation of the legs and feet is another baffling consistency across many centuries of reports. Why does the fire stop at the ankles, leaving the slippers or shoes perfectly unburned? Some speculate that the lack of fat in the lower extremities halts the progression of the wick effect. Others believe it is a sign of the upward nature of the heat escaping through the torso and head. From a folklore perspective, it looks as though the person was simply erased from the earth. The remains look like a glitch in reality, rather than the result of a physical process. In the case of Jeannie Saffin in 1982, the phenomenon was actually witnessed by a family member. Jeannie was a 61-year-old woman with the mental age of a child sitting in her kitchen in London. Her father turned to see flames shooting from her mouth and eyes like a dragon. He desperately tried to put out the fire with water, but the flames persisted until she died. She did not speak or cry out during the ordeal, and the fire did not burn her clothes. This witness account contradicts the slow burning wick effect theory entirely. Jeannie Saffin died in the hospital days later from severe burns and lung damage caused by the internal fire. The police constable who attended the scene confirmed that her clothes were not the source of the fire. This case is one of the few where the victim was not alone and the ignition was witnessed. It suggests a sudden and violent chemical reaction within the body rather than a slow burn. It brings the horror of spontaneous combustion out of the sealed room and into the light. It proves that it can happen in seconds right in front of loved ones. The randomness of spontaneous human combustion makes it a difficult subject for serious academic study. It cannot be replicated in a lab, and it happens too rarely to gather consistent data. This leaves a void that is filled by storytellers and ghost hunters who see the supernatural at play. They whisper of poltergeist activity or angry spirits that ignite the living from within. The lack of answers allows the imagination to conjure the worst possible scenarios. It becomes a ghost story where the ghost is the fire living inside us all. We like to believe that we are in control of our bodies and our environment. We trust that physics follows rules, and that fire requires a spark and fuel to exist. Spontaneous human combustion shatters this illusion of safety and control in the most brutal fashion. It suggests that the biology we rely on to keep us alive can turn against us in an instant. The very energy that powers our cells can become an inferno that consumes our existence. It is a betrayal of the self that leads to total annihilation. The photographs of these crime scenes are stark and confusing, with high contrast between ash and order. A pristine living room with a pile of charred remains in the center looks like a staged art piece. It is difficult for the human mind to reconcile the violence of the death with the calmness of the setting. The brain searches for a logical cause like a fireplace or a heater, but finds nothing. This cognitive dissonance creates a feeling of unease that lingers long after looking at the images. It forces us to question the stability of the world around us. As we advance in science and technology, we expect to solve the mysteries of the past, yet spontaneous human combustion remains as elusive today as it was in the 18th century. We have better forensic tools and better understanding of chemistry, but no definitive answer. The coroner in Ireland ruling it as a cause of death proves we are still in the dark. It stands as a monument to the unknown in an age where we think we know everything. It is a reminder that nature still holds terrifying secrets. Think about the heat of a candle flame and multiply that by thousands of degrees. Imagine that heat originating next to your heart and expanding outward, consuming bone and flesh. Imagine the silence of the room as you vanish, leaving only your shoes behind as evidence. This is not a ghost story from a movie, but a reality recorded in police files. It is a rare but undeniable facet of the human condition that we ignore to sleep better. The fire is not always outside waiting to get in. Sometimes it is already inside. So tonight, as you sit in your comfortable chair, in the safety of your locked home, take a moment, check the temperature of the room, and listen to the quiet hum of your surroundings. Are you truly safe, or is the potential for combustion lying dormant in your cells. The history of Mary Reeser and Doctor Bentley tells us that safety is just an illusion. The next time you feel a sudden flash of heat, consider the possibility of the unexplained. The darkness holds many things, but the fire within is the most dangerous of all.